Good afternoon. Hopefully everyone has enjoyed the afternoon and evening, going into the evening here with Dr. Smith and Bishop Olson. At this point in time, this is our Q&A section. But without further ado, I'd like to begin this portion of the program. This question is directed to Bishop Olson first. Can you explain the best way to approach a couple that is about to get married in the church and is having premarital sex, contracepting, and cohabitating?
Are you asking me in particular, or? I think it depends on what is your relationship to that couple, first of all. What are the clear boundaries of ministry? Is it relational? Are they your children? I think all of those are relative circumstances, I would say. But in principle, I would say listen to them, have them offer their reasons, and then also just say, I'd say as you answer them, just say why this is not helping them to get to where they need to be, where they are going to be, because that inherently is not a good decision and doesn't lead, as for the reasons that we've covered today, to a happy, healthy, fulfilling marriage and life together. So I guess that's not much as far as how, but so much of how depends on the circumstances. I think conversation and respectful discourse, but respectful discourse is always, always has substance to it. It's not just platitudes, or nice conversation, but a real meaningful conversation. I always think asking them why, what are they trying to accomplish? What's the point of what they're doing? Why do they think what they're doing is a good thing? And if they have reason, if they don't, then discuss the reasons so we get to the point of that. I think that's the best possible, if it's possible.
Thank you, Bishop. This question is addressed to Dr. Smith. How do you defend church teaching on marriage without apologizing for church teaching?
No, we don't have anything to apologize for. We have to have confidence that this is the truth, and we have abundant evidence that it is, and also have confidence when we're talking to baptized people and confirmed people that the graces are there, right? And that I always try to say a prayer to the Holy Spirit when I'm talking to students that I know to be baptized, but might be resistant. I say, again, confirmed that, and even natural law, that I'm assuming that this is the truth. And I'm assuming that they are, in spite of the culture and everything, that there's somewhere in there that this truth will resonate with them. And I think what the bishop said about talking to couples who are, contracepting, living together, etc., it does make a huge difference on your relationship with them and where they are. But often it is, as he said, you have to dialogue with them and understand them. But I found with many people who come to me with questions about church teaching, end-of-life issues, in vitro fertilization, I often start out by saying, thank you for coming. You're clearly interested, at least in the church's teaching, and that's a great thing. I said, but have you ever read whatever document there is, or a portion of the catechism or something? I say, well, why don't you read this? And I talk a little bit about it. So why don't you read this, and then call me back after you have, and tell me what you think. And I honestly am amazed at how many, after they've read it, agree with the church. And they say, I never knew that. And now I can see, even when they're difficult decisions, like unplugging grandma or not, I say, well, what do you think you should do now that you've read this? And they'll tell me. And often that's exactly what I think is right too. And so I don't have to tell them that this is true or whatever. I ask them to read something, in best, oh my gosh, best if I can get them to read it in front of the Blessed Sacrament. I said, why don't you read it and then go sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament from anywhere from 15 minutes to an hour and ask God to tell you what to do. And I've had friends who had their children, cohabiting, and I've suggested that. And even the kids are even going to church and they're still receiving communion, and they think there's nothing wrong with that. And I said, well, why don't you ask them if they'll go sit in front of the Blessed Sacrament and ask God what Jesus thinks of what they're doing. they don't even have to go. I mean, the ones who know that some of them know that it's wrong right away. They know if they went and sat in front of Jesus, that they wouldn't be very comfortable. Others won't go for the same reason, because they know if they went and sat in front of Jesus, they might hear something they don't want to hear. But it's a great challenge to people to get them to test what their own belief is about things. If you're not comfortable going and sitting in front of Jesus and talking to him about this, what does that suggest about what you know about your own behavior?
Right. Thank you, Dr. Smith. This question is directed to Bishop Olson. How can we, as laity, respectfully assist our priests on the teachings of the church related to Humanae Vitae?
First of all, prayer, real prayer. And I think then also there are plenty of opportunities in the diocese to be formed as a catechist and to give of your time, if possible, in the areas of as a catechist or working in marriage preparation. Sponsor couples are needed. And this takes time, which is a valuable commodity today. But I think a willingness to do so, I think, would be very, very helpful. And working not just within your parish, but also within the whole local church in the life of the diocese. I think that would be a very big help and great value. And just in as far as with the priests, just simply encouraging them, to take their preaching seriously, and to recognize that that's probably one of the most important things they do is preaching, because it takes place within the celebration of the Eucharist in the form of the homily, which is essential to the celebration of the Eucharist, certainly the Sunday Eucharist. So I think those encouragements are very important. Prayer, willingness of gift of time, and then also encouragement.
Okay. Another question directed to Bishop Olson. What is the difference between natural family planning and artificial contraception? Are they not one and the same?
Well, I think a cursory listening in this afternoon would have explained the difference between those two. But I think natural family planning, of course, involves stewardship of one's body, stewardship it involves much more of a decision and intentional actions of love and respect. I think contraception, especially artificial contraception, avoids decisions and, in a sense, blurs the boundaries of respect between a husband and wife. I say that's one distinction I would make.
Thank you.
Okay.
Please, Dr. Smith.
It's interesting, sometimes the people asking the question on the difference are those who think NFP is just the same as contraception, and so why shouldn't they be allowed to use contraception? And I think, again, the talk this afternoon should explain a lot of that. But sometimes the question is also asked by those who are very, very generous, and they want to just let the babies come. And they think that NFP is another form of contraception, that people who are using NFP are also being sort of excessively desirous of being controlling over their sexual lives, that they're trying to control when and how many children they have, and they consider that to be some sort of contraceptive mentality. And the church doesn't think so. And I think that's the first thing to kind of challenge people with. Humanae Vitae makes it very clear that there are good reasons for wanting to manage your family size. In fact, it says that in order to have a large family, you have to make a prudent decision to do that, all right? Meaning that you believe that you have the resources. Now, in our culture, we think we need way more resources than we generally need, but it's still, we need to, you say, just let the babies come. You want to say, we've made a decision, we can handle just letting the babies come. And some people say, well, you're not trusting God enough. And I say, well, do you give away your money every month? Do you give away all your money every month? Why wouldn't we just say that God, at the end of the month, we should have zero amount of money because God will provide for the next month? See, nobody does that. I mean, nobody does that, except maybe some, radical religious orders who have been called to do that. That's their charism. But everybody should be planning carefully, right? Banking your money, having a budget, deciding how much to spend, what to spend on. Why would you take less care in a certain sense with having children, right? They're a lot of responsibility. And it's never supposed to, of course, be for selfish reasons. And you should always be asking yourself, is the reason we want to limit our family size, are we being selfish or are we being responsible in the sense of meeting the needs of those that we already have, meeting each other's needs? And I always say, if you think you're being selfish, go talk to some sensible person, explain your situation and get someone else's perspective on it. And pray about it. I say, use natural family planning, but keep saying to God, if we're being selfish, please let us know. We don't want to be selfish. We want to be responsible. So if we're being selfish, please let us know, and God will let you know. But I think that people think they're not being very realistic, at least, and they're not being faithful to church teaching. Humanae Vitae says you can have psychological, physiological, economic, and social reasons for limiting your family size. All of those 4 reasons. And it says responsible parenthood and generous parenthood can be practiced by those who either for a determined or an undetermined period of time decide that it's a good thing to limit the number of babies that they have. So you can decide for a short period, say in the next year, we don't think it would be a good idea to introduce baby in this house, or for the next 5 years. Now you'll have lots of time to revisit those decisions. I mean, you can't write those in stone, actually. Life doesn't let you do that. But anyway, I think that people have to be careful about being, more Catholic than the Pope. But also asking God, tell us, are we being selfish? If people are being selfish using natural family planning, the best way, I think one of the best ways to become unselfish in using natural family planning is to use natural family planning, because people like to have sex. And they're going to have all these moments where they want to have sex, and they're going to have to come up with reasons. And if their reasons are lame, and it's good if they have to say them aloud. The reason we don't want another child right now is because, we've always wanted a trip to Disneyland. I hope that's trivial. I think it is. But if they say that aloud, then maybe they say, really? Is a trip to Disneyland more important than another baby? Anyway, so that's
Wonderful. Thank you, Doctor. This next question is addressed to both. What do you say to a person that does not believe in marriage? So either or.
Is that person married? I guess that's it. Probably, yeah. I guess that, I say that in jest, but it's, I think that simply, I always ask them, what don't you believe in? I think really as far as what do they think marriage is that it's not worth believing in? And then usually it's not an understanding of marriage that has any sort of value, except it's it's a contract between individuals. It's shared interests. What have you, or it's a temporary arrangement for property rights, etc. What is it they think that it is? It's sort of like I think about that when people talk about so-called same-sex marriage, so-called. It's like, well, and they say, well, it's the same thing that I have with my spouse. And I say, well, what do you have with your spouse that's identical with this? And how does it look like permanence, fidelity, and openness to God's gift of children? Because that is in essence what marriage is, and not privacy or spirituality or the current definition offered us in Obergefell by the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Bishop. This next question, again, is addressed to both of you. What would you say to Catholic parents that tell you their child wants to be transgender?
Well, you're not grabbing a mic on that. Let me take that away.
Let's not rush.
These are always, the hypothetical questions in morals are always the hardest to answer because they're, they're hypothetical, so they're so clear. And it's always the questions you get in moral decisions are always so complicated. There's never an uncomplicated moral dilemma, is there? That's why they're moral dilemmas. But I'd say the clarity of is that this, how do I say this? Is that this has been the most recent type of description of with this thing of transgender that is so driven by a political agenda. I mean, in the past, one might have a case of where there were hormonal situations of two sets of genitalia, or one undeveloped, or one better developed or not. Well, there's a biological measurement by which one can tell what's a predominant situation, and then there are medical approaches that can basically help the person to function as best as possible as either male or female, given what the predominance is. What is new here now is that the psychological compulsion is being offered as a reason, or a social decision is being offered as sufficient reason for one then to alter or mutilate one's own body to selectively identify as the other sex, or the use of the term gender, which is a postmodern construct. Okay, this is new. So I had this conversation with a number of other religious people, religious leaders, and one of them was saying, well, we have a 14-year-old in our congregation, and he decided that he's really a female, and so he's asked us to change what we call him, his name from Brian to Brianna, and so we're helping him along with it. And I said, how? And he said, well, we're agreeing to do that. And I said, where are the parents? He said, well, his mother says it's what he wants to do. And I'm like, he wants to drive too, and we don't let him do that for good reason. And so I said, what measurement can you offer me where I can tell whether my responsibility is to call Child Protective Services because this young man is being, in a sense, abused by being, compelled to take hormonal treatments, or told that it's a good idea, and what other measurement would you tell me? Then I could say, no, this is actually a good thing, since he's unable to give consent in other legal matters. How can you do? And they couldn't. Of course, there's no measurement for that, and that's why this is really particularly agenda-driven. We talk about a conscience in medicine. People say, well, don't bring your religious values into the practice of medicine. Well, usually this is said with regard to abortion. Some of the conscience protection battles we're facing, again, with hospitals, like insurance coverage, health system, where they say, well, Catholic medical schools, being compelled by government money to have their med students take abortion training, so they say, well, you can't bring your religious values into this, can't bring your conscience into this. And yet, doctors rightfully, so far, will willingly not prescribe hormone treatment for adolescents, either to make them grow faster or to even change them. Now that also is under jeopardy, and it's turning into madness, because narrative is driving facts, and that includes even the area of science and medicine. So I guess I would ask, well, why do they want to do this? Have you asked them that? Why would a good parental responsibility, especially at that age of adolescence, is where they're growing into interdependence from stricter dependence, right, and into adulthood, articulate their reasons as to why they would want to do this, and then what is wrong with that. I think that's the best way. I don't think just simply indulgently saying, oh yes, of course, that's fine. Or on the other extreme, absolutely not. Just what is the problem? What's the reasoning behind this? And then when I say that, I don't mean, well, they'll tell you what they'll do. I mean, just you'll get a measurement as to what is prompting them to want to make such a decision. Because it's a very serious decision, it's a life or death decision.
Yeah.
Have at it.
No, that's very good. Just, one thing I'd ask, just read a lot. Ryan Anderson has a new book. Was it When Harry Became Sally or something like that? Ryan Anderson. I've got it. I haven't read it, but it's got great reviews. He's very sympathetic. He's deeply feels the pain of individuals who are wanting this, but I heard one man, Walter Heyer, Heyer, who when he was 40, it was a very successful businessman, had a wife and 4 children, and he decided to become transgendered. And then another 10, 15 years later, he went back. And he said what he discovered, and he has a website that he gets thousands of hits on, and he finds his story is a very common story, that he just didn't want to be himself. He had a story when he was a little boy, 4 years old up till 7 or something. His grandmother took care of him. His grandmother would dress him up as a little girl and just have a great time with him being a little girl. And then one day he decided to take home the dress that he liked to dress him in and put it in the bottom of his dresser drawer and thought his father, nobody would find it. Well, his father did find it, and his father got furious and beat him and was, of course, furious at the grandmother and then furious at his wife. And the parents ended up divorcing, estrangement between the mother and her mother. He thought he was responsible for the whole thing, right? It was his fault that all those things happened in the family. So for years he carried that, and he said, I didn't like myself. And then he was sexually abused by an older cousin, and so all sorts of things. And he said, a lot of it is that people there's something about themselves they really don't like, and the only way they think they can put that aside is become a different self. And the most radical self different that they can become is a different sex. So you try to figure out what that is. So I'm quite certain some of it now is simply trendy. And it's, you want a lot of attention. If you want a lot of attention, you join the gay group, or you become, say, you're transgendered. So that has to be paid some attention to, about how genuine is this really, or is this just a desire for some attention? But I think one thing I would do too, there's a TV show I watched on Frontline, it might have been Growing Up Trans, but it was on Frontline, and I highly recommend watching it if you're interested in the issue. But it had about 5 or 6 prepubescent kids, all who thought they were to be transgendered. And they had obviously been coached, and they were very, very articulate. And being asked, at 11, this means you'll never be a father, you'll never be a mother. Are you ready for that? And they say, oh yes, I've always wanted to be a father or mother, but I really think it's important enough for me that I'm willing to do this. Again, what 11-year-old, you don't let them choose their college, let them get married. Who's going to choose their gender at that time? But what was very clear was that most often the parents were terrible tension between them about how to deal with this. And one father thought he'd go to hell if he let his daughter transgender to a male. And the wife was very clearly saying, well, you choose God or me, but I want to meet this need of our daughter to become a male. And he capitulated. But I think many times it's good for counselors to separate the husband and wife and ask them to speak honestly. And you might find out there's a huge difference between the two of them, even on cohabiting sometimes, or we don't believe in marriage. You separate them, and one or the other really does want to get married, and one or the other is not so happy with cohabiting. And just say, well, if you're going to go forward in this relationship, you have to be honest with this person that you're with, and you have to have more self-respect to have your feelings and your views have to have some respect. So I think if you find out that the parents are divided, again, then you say, well, do you want this to be a reason that your marriage gets in such trouble, or do you want to try to become educated on this and try to have a unified position? So I think a lot of it is if it's education, because it's very hard for me to see people who could read all the literature out there and then think it's a good idea to let this kid undergo transgendered, any kind of procedures or hormones.
Thank you, Dr. Smith. This next question is directed to you. What are some practical steps on teaching Humanae Vitae to teens?
What are some of the steps of teaching?
Teaching Humanae Vitae to teens, some practical steps for parents.
Well, a lot of teaching, of course, as you all know, comes indirectly. I always say my father and my mother both followed what I kind of consider default modes of parenting. I'm sure there's actually better modes, but I think these come naturally to people. My father would kind of rant and rave, expressing disgust at people who did certain things. And it wasn't always bad. I mean, I remember driving down the street and he saw a young woman who was very immodestly clad, and he said, "Where's that girl's father? If he cared for her, he wouldn't let her go out like that." Or some man at church who's divorced and was, got divorced because he was having an affair. My dad, being an usher, he'll say, "Who's he think he's fooling? He's an usher. He thinks he's fooling God, huh?" It's this kind of thing, and you're just it just sunk right in. It sunk right in. So a lot of it has to be, commentary that you do on things. It doesn't have to be direct sitting down and teaching them things, but these people have a large family. I think they're following the church's teaching on sexuality. It's just so impressive that they're so generous. My mother had I called a stream of consciousness way of teaching us. It was like you always had a 2-year-old in the back seat, so you had to keep talking, to keep them interested in things. But I remember, we'd be making dinner, or breakfast or something, and she said, this is your father's toast. He likes, every corner of the toast buttered. I want you to do that for your father because he's so good to us and he loves us so much. Of course, belligerent little teenager can butter his own bread. No, you're going to do it, and you're going to do it as your father likes it. But it's just this sort of thing is just, is to talk about, our culture. If you see something on TV that you think is related to contraception or the Me Too movement or something, all of these are teaching moments. And so I think a lot of it has to do with just conversation, and you should be doing these things, folding laundry with your kids, changing the oil in the car, taking the car to get washed, and just as things come up, try to find ways to convey these lessons.
I think, first of all, a happy marriage is the best example, all right, and especially for children, and an honest marriage. I think also with Humanae Vitae, it is, it's 50 years ago, and there's also been, as far as the papal teaching is concerned, you continue, there's further development, and it's and also what has sprung from that over time, I think, and that's important with study. So Evangelium Vitae, even Familiaris Consortio, and now at least we need to have the discussion with Amoris Laetitia, but as part of that long line and unbroken line of the entire papal magisterium. Now I think that's a more formal study of it, but the concrete substance of Humanae Vitae, I think, is especially just what does one consent to when they marry? What are you promising? Permanence, till death do you part, right? Fidelity, exclusivity, and openness to God's gift of children. Those 3 things are essential to marriage, and that's what you're giving your consent to. I think that, keep it simple. That's as basic as it can be, and that's really what the nature of it is. So that's what I would say.
Thank you, Bishop Olson. We have time for one last question. This is directed to Bishop Olson. From a father, what are some ways a father can provide a sound moral environment to their children in today's age?
Respect their children's mother, first and foremost, I think. I think spending time with them. I think also conversation. Ask questions about, with your children, what's going on in their lives. Have a conversation. But also, as far as being present. And I would say that those 2 things, respecting their mother, treating them with respect and showing that, and then also time well spent and intelligently spent with children. not just wasting time.
Okay. We'll squeeze in one more here. This is a very simple one for both of you. Any recommended resources related to marriage and family, or on the sanctity of life, or anything related to Humanae Vitae you would recommend?
Is this your book? Are
That's
you
a bit
selling
scholarly.
your book?
Yeah, this one's a bit scholarly. This is more for people who want a scholarly approach. But the book, I mean, I did 25 years ago. Why Humanae Vitae was Right or Reader is useful. I'm putting out another volume called Why Humanae Vitae is Still Right. The second volume of the Reader. But the U.S. Bishop's website is actually fantastic for resources on marriage and family and natural family planning. You'll find abundant resources there. Any one of the NFP organizations, Couple to Couple League, they have a monthly newsletter that is just terrific with tips for good marriages and how to live with natural family planning and every other thing, infertility and disagreements and all sorts of things. So it's a very rich world right now for being able to, the resources are out there. The internet is fantastic. So I would start with the U.S. Bishop's website. I would go to the Couple League, and then you'll be led to many other places. There's Catholic Publications, Crisis, the Catholic Thing, Catholic Educational Resource Center, just great materials out there. So almost anything you want, you type in a few Google possibilities and you'll find very useful information. I think Ray Garendi's material on raising children is very good. Ray Garendi, he's on Catholic radio a lot. Jason Everett's stuff for young people, for chastity, is extremely good. Leah Darrow for young women. Really, it's astonishing how much good stuff there is. And usually you find one good source and it will lead you to many others.
Bishop, anything to that?
I just keep it simple, start basic. USCCB is a trustworthy resource in that way. The org, as Dr. Smith said, catechism, very basic, and I'd say also I think our family life office does a very, very excellent job for resources, and I wish people would access them more. So thank you.
For those who want more information, it's usccb.org for United States Bishops Catholic Conference Bishops website in particular, or for the Diocese of Fort Worth, fwdioc.org, on the Marriage and Family tab as well, where you can get a multitude of resources in these areas. We want to thank Bishop Olson and Dr. Smith for their time in this Q&A session. We're going to give a round of applause.